I was interested in the 1996 Telecommunications Act and the impact it has made on the media industry and average citizens. While many people have never heard of it before, it makes significant changes to the regulations and rules of the telecommunications industry. It is responsible for the giant media corporations that exist today, as well as a host of other problems. The Act was the first major overhaul of telecommunications legislation in over 60 years. This act was passed by Congress on January 3, 1996, during the Clinton administration in a Republican Congress. It was signed into law on February 1st by President Bill Clinton. Clinton said that consumers will receive the benefits of lower prices, better quality, and greater choices in their telephone and cable services, and they'll continue to benefit from a diversity of voices and viewpoints in radio, television, and print media. But how is the act going to do this? This act was supposedly designed to promote competition among the communications industry by primarily deregulating the industry. Deregulation refers to the government lifting or changing the regulations for an industry that had been in place before. The companies claimed that the government's burdensome regulations cause high prices, lower efficiency, and other problems. By deregulating the industry, they argued, it would benefit the American consumer by lowering prices and providing higher quality services through the virtues of competition. However, such claims have turned out to be false. What has happened instead is a media consolidation, which is when a handful of media companies own more and more of various media outlets, has increased significantly, with detrimental effects for the consumer and local owners. For example, in the radio industry, there was a cap in place that limited a company to ownership of a maximum of 40 stations. After the act, the cap was lifted so that a company could own an unlimited amount. Previously, companies were also banned from owning more than 4 stations in each market. Now they can own up to 8 stations in each market. This led directly to the creation of the largest radio conglomerate in the U.S., Clear Channel. According to Thompson and DeCola, passage of the 1996 Telecommunications Act, Clear Channel has grown from 40 stations to 1,240 stations, 30 times more than the congressional regulation previously allowed. No potential competitor owns even 1/4 the number of Clear Channel stations. With over 100 million listeners, Clear Channel reaches over 1/3 of the U.S. population. By 2001, the number of radio station owners had dropped about 25%, from 5,100 owners in 1996 to 3,800 owners. Because of deregulation, concentration of radio by giant companies was now possible. As larger and larger firms bought up more and more stations, local independent competitors were driven out. As a result, ownership of more and more stations ended up in fewer and fewer companies, such as Clear Channel. In the cable industry, deregulation lifted price controls on rates for non-basic cable service, relaxed bans on cross-ownership rules, and restricted local cable franchising authorities from making certain demands of cable companies. Before the act, cable prices were fixed to provide affordability to average Americans. After deregulation, prices soared more than 40% because there was no actual competition between cable companies. Instead, each cable company had their own local monopolies on local markets, allowing them to charge whatever price they desired. Indeed, 98% of the households with access to cable are served by only one cable company. One of the few legislators who opposed the Telecommunications Act, Senator John McCain, noted in 2003, "From January 1996 to the present, the Consumer Price Index has risen 17.4%. Cable rates are up 47.2%. Local phone rates are up 23.2%.
Let's turn to the sky-high cost of cable television, up a staggering 77% just since 1996. That's double the rate of inflation. Well, now the Federal Communications Commission chair, like many consumers, is fed up, saying in a hearing Wednesday that subscribers should have more choice, especially for the amount of money they spend. Consumer correspondent Elizabeth Leamy is live with us this morning in Washington. She has more. Good morning, Elizabeth.
Morning, Chris. Here's the thing. Studies show most Americans only watch about 15 channels, and yet they're forced to buy about 100 channels of basic cable because of the way the industry bundles channels together.
Well, look who decided to show.
You might remember the infamous cable guy, played by Jim Carrey.
I can be your best friend or your worst enemy.
Some people consider the cable company their enemy.
The bills are definitely going up, and I think it's too much. It's not worth the money.
American cable customers pay an average of about $60 a month. And you know how it works. If you want to watch the Weather Channel, you have to buy all these other channels you may never watch.
An average family has very little choice over what channels are included, yet they're having to pay more and more for those same channels.
In fact, most other technology products have gone down in price, while cable bills just keep going up.
Most cable companies enjoy kind of regional fiefdoms where there's not very much else out there in terms of other providers.
I definitely wish I could pay less because I probably only watch 10% of the channels that I get.
FCC Chairman Kevin Martin says he would like to see just that, a la carte pricing. Some Canadian companies already offer it.
I think consumers would dramatically benefit by having the additional choice.
Canadian customers pay about $13 for the basics. Then they can pick and choose another 15 channels for $17 or another 30 channels for less than $1 a piece.
We know right now that you can get good value for a huge variety of channels.
The cable industry says a la carte pricing will raise consumer costs.
It's the comparison between having a buffet or ordering lots of sides. Sides always cost you more.
The industry says less popular channels would be forced to lower their advertising rates, and consumers would have to make up the difference with higher subscription fees.
The industry goes on to say that the government could end up giving consumers fewer.
In the broadcasting industry, the Act increased the size of the national audience one company could reach from 25% of television households to 35%. It lifted entirely the limit on the number of television stations that any one company could own. That limit had been 12 stations before. It also repealed laws that blocked broadcast networks from owning cable systems. It extended the term of a broadcast license from 5 years to 8 years, and made it more difficult for citizens to hold broadcasters accountable for their license. Lifting all these ownership limits meant that companies in different areas of the industry could acquire or merge with other media companies, creating companies with various holdings in different media. The Act created a very friendly environment for mergers and acquisitions, which is exactly what happened. Some notable mergers include Time Warner merging with Turner Broadcasting, Disney merging with ABC, and Viacom acquiring Paramount Communications. As you can see, the only diversity here is the diversity of these conglomerates' holdings.
Its effect on media consolidation's effect on journalism, I think, is where FAIR tries to zero in. There's effects on music and artistic expression that are pretty profound, and I think people have documented pretty clearly that you're looking at a kind of limiting of the availability and the choices to people, sort of a homogenation of radio and art even. When FAIR looks at these questions, we look at it from a journalism perspective. And the question that you try to pose is, what does allowing a small handful of corporations this kind of control over the media, what kind of effect does that have in the newsroom? And I think what you see is a collision of values. You have commercial values, these are commercial enterprises, and you have journalistic values. And too often commercial values win out over these values that should exist in journalism, independent, aggressive investigation. That's often not very good for the business side of a corporation, and so I think corporate media have done a good job of sort of tamping down those tendencies in their own reporting and amplifying things that are good for the bottom line. They make a great profit at it, it's just not necessarily very good journalism.
Even though there's 300 channels on satellite and cable, there's still less diversity than there used to be because so few companies control so many of those channels, and particularly the ones that people tend to watch. There's just 5 or 6 companies in America that dominate the media landscape, the giant multinational conglomerates. So there may be a lot of different voices, but they're coming from the same ventriloquist. What we need is to enhance diversity, to make sure there are as many voices as possible so that people can make up their own minds about decisions of the day. Now, if we allow newspapers to buy up local media outlets, there's going to be a voice lost in that community. There's going to be less diversity.
I think people have realized that there's something very, very important happening here tonight, and it has to do with their own freedom and that of their families to get information that they have to have. Not that they want, they must have it in order to function in a free society. And they've come out to protest the fact that they're not getting that. These days, particularly because of what's happening with media consolidation and big owners, fewer owners, owning and operating more and more of their media outlets. I'm a former broadcaster. I spent my career in news before I became a union official to represent reporters, anchors, and others in their working conditions. But I left the news business specifically because it was no longer meeting its responsibility to the public to deliver the kind of information the public needed. I watched radio and television particularly move away from a public service function to a bottom line function, where we were covering snowstorms and floods and little murders and house fires, but not covering anything that ended in ION, like education, legislation, those kinds of things. But that's what's happening even more so today, and consolidation becomes an extreme issue in that, because as a union representative, we've not only found fewer owners with more stations, but a homogenation of the content. And the content is not serving the public to the extent that it should. And I don't know what is the way out. I don't have the answer to that, but I know it's not consolidation.
The implications for the functioning of our democracy are dire as well. Jürgen Habermas, a German philosopher, coined the term public sphere. The public sphere is an area where people in the society can freely discuss societal problems and solutions, and as a result, take political action. The closest thing we have to a public sphere is the mass media, where we get our information to make judgments and participate in our democracy. If the mass media is concentrated in the hands of a few powerful conglomerates, it will be considered an oligopoly. An oligopoly will result in fewer independent owners and diverse views. A select few companies will control all the information. According to Robert McChesney, a prominent media scholar and critic, the First Amendment's protection of freedom of the press as interpreted by the Supreme Court means that a viable press system is necessary for a democracy to function. If such a press system were not available, the state must create the system and help it. In this case, the state needs to intervene in order to stop these companies from media domination. The 1996 Telecommunications Act did not bring about the benefits of lower price, media diversity, competition, and higher quality service as Congress was led to believe. Instead, the opposite has occurred, with media consolidation, higher cable prices, fewer local and minority competitors, and lower quality service. To amend these problems, Congress and the Justice Department will need to break up these giant media conglomerates that have virtually become oligopolies. The 1996 Telecommunications Act will need to be repealed and replaced with a new bill that puts in regulations that put a cap on ownership limits and market reach, ban cross-ownership of different media, and allow local and minority competitors into local markets. The new President-elect Obama can also appoint a new FCC chairman who recognizes these problems and will work in the public interest as opposed to the corporate interest. These are all merely initial suggestions to reform media. There are many more far-reaching reforms needed, but until the act is repealed and regulations reinstated, we will not be able to truly get the media we deserve.